Welcome to our workshop. We have been working with lots of students and have observed quite a few traits that can be difficult to change as they get older. And these traits can be seen from as young as elementary school age all the way to college students. And that's why today we have put together this workshop to talk about some of the common mistakes so that parents can work on them now rather than later. In the last slide, we saw some traits that were exhibited from our students. But in this slide, we want to talk about the common mistakes that parents make and their solutions.
The first thing we want to go over is setting developmentally appropriate goals. So what does this mean? The human brain actually doesn't fully develop until you're in your mid 20s. And the final part of the brain that is developing is the prefrontal cortex. And that's in charge of executive functioning and decision making. So, up until that point, people need more help and more support with some of those tasks. And so, what this means is every year, your children are hitting new milestones, and each of those milestones in social, emotional, thinking, or learning skills, it marks the capability of acquiring those skills. Something I do want to mention is that capability and proficiency are not synonymous, right? They're different. When we hit that milestone, your brain or your child's brain is then capable of acquiring this new skill. But sometimes, especially as we get older, these skills need to be cultivated for us to be more proficient in them. Take empathy, for example, right? Empathy is kind of being able to actually put yourself in someone else's shoes and to really kind of understand on a deeper level how they are feeling. This is a really important skill, especially if you end up working as part of a team, or if you take on leadership roles. And so when you have a child who is a little bit younger, right, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9 years old, they can experience sympathy, right? They can look at someone and say, they're really sad. I see that. But it's not until you're about 10 years old when you're really able to take on perspective in a way that is truly empathetic, right? Your brain has developed to the point where you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, I see what they're going through. I've been there myself and I can experience it with them. I can sit with them and say, hey, I see why you're sad. Let me help you, or let me do whatever I can. And that happens around 10 years of age, right? So when you develop that milestone, your brain now allows you to have that empathetic perspective taking ability. However, you still need to be able to learn, you still need to learn, excuse me, you still need to learn how to effectively utilize that skill, right? It's similar for something like negotiation. um, when you're about 10 years old, you develop this capability to see a rule and say, I can change that. I can negotiate it and I can make it so that the rule is going to be better for both me and my parent. And before that, it's a different approach, right? Before that, children are saying, I see the rule and I either follow it or I choose to ignore it, right? There's none of that kind of negotiation of it. So why is this really important, right? Developmentally appropriate goals can lead to, a, a greater sense of autonomy in what you're doing. It lets children feel competent in what they're doing. And all children really long for that feeling of competence. They want to feel successful. They want to feel like they've been able to accomplish a task. And feeling competent in their abilities is a psychological and emotional need for children. So, because of this, when we set developmentally inappropriate goals for them, it's setting them up for failure in a lot of ways. It can lead to frustration, loss in confidence, feelings of inferiority, and negative associations with both learning and particular subjects. And so, whenever I think of kind of developmentally inappropriate goals, I actually think back to the beginning of my teaching experience. And I had a student who was terrified of getting up in front of the class and sharing her work. She was terrified of answering a question in front of other people. Even just kind of calling on her, asking her if she wanted to share, she would completely freeze up. And so I took her aside and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And she said that she didn't feel she could make a mistake. She said if she got up and she said something wrong, that, she would somehow be inferior at that point. And I said, okay. And we talked about it a little bit. And then, a few weeks later, I had parent teacher conferences and her father came in. And the first thing he said to me is, "How do I get my daughter into Harvard?" And mind you, I was teaching kindergarten at this point. So she was 5 years old. Um, and, I had to kind of explain to him that that is a goal that he had set for her. It's not a goal that she understood yet, right? A 5-year old, a 6-year old, even a 7 or 8-year old, they don't understand what college is. They can't make that connection. So instead, they rely entirely on what they've been told by others. So for this student, what she had been told is that her goal was to get into Harvard. That meant that she had to be perfect. That meant that she had to be smart. That meant that she had to do everything in her power to work hard and gain that competency. Um, but it wasn't something that she could understand. It wasn't something tangible for her. And so instead, it became a source of extreme anxiety. And it was debilitating. She would freeze when I asked her to do something because she was that worried she was going to make a mistake. And so when we're dealing with younger children like this, we want to create goals that are appropriate for where they're at. You want them to be a little bit more tangible. Um, and so when we do create something that is beyond their grasp, it can be harmful in that way. So, what are the solutions, right? How can we create these developmentally appropriate goals? The first thing is really thinking about milestones. What is appropriate for that age, right? I mentioned a couple at the beginning where, by about 10 years old, your child's going to be able to empathize better. They're going to be better at perspective taking. So a goal that is revolved around that would be perfect for a 10 or 11-year-old, but maybe not for a 6-year-old. The next thing you can do is kind of really engage your children and have them be part of the goal formation process. Find things that are interesting to them, things that they understand, things that they want to try and accomplish, and allow them to help set those goals as well, right? Additionally, you can add appropriate scaffolding, right? You can kind of help them piece by piece. And you can help break down any goals that might seem too large or too unmanageable. So actually, if we can go to the next slide, I have a couple of examples of different goals and kind of how they can be framed differently, right? So say you have, a kindergartner, right? They're 5 or 6 years old and you're their parent. Your goal for them right now is to have a clean room. An inappropriate framing of this might be saying, "Clean your room," right? So why might that be inappropriate? It feels pretty simple to us as adults, but children's brains work differently than ours. So when you look at this is cognitively a little bit beyond what a 5 or 6-year-old can do right now. And the reason for that is because it's a lot of steps all in one. So, what actually is more helpful is breaking down what needs to be done into smaller pieces. So, telling your child, pick up all the books, putting them on the shelf. That's one thing. A 5 or 6-year-old says, "Oh, I can do that. I know how to do that." But when you just say, "Clean your room," it becomes overwhelming. There's too much going on, there are too many steps. And a lot of times they might do one step and then kind of move on, or they might just say, "No, I'm not going to clean my room today." Right. And then another example of this might be if you're looking at a 10 or 11-year-old and you want them to make good individual choices, saying something like focus on yourself, while it does sound good and that is your goal for them, it's going to be really difficult for them to internalize that because socioemotionally at this age, they're very, very focused on their peers. and what their peers think of them, what the people around them are doing and what they have to say. So instead, you give them a little bit more information. You can remind them, we all have different wants, different needs, different skills. Because of this, your skills and your wants and needs are going to be different than your friends sometimes. And that's okay. I want you to think about this as you're making the choices so that you can make the best choice for you. So instead of saying, don't think about it at all, which is developmentally inappropriate from them at that point, you're saying, think about it, but let me frame it for you in a positive way. I want you thinking more about this rather than not at all.
Just to summarize what you said, right? First is that your child's brain is still growing. Okay, so don't, I guess, give them some time. Don't expect them to know everything right now, right? Because again, they're like, I think a lot of people say that, our brain is like a sponge. It's absorbing new information each day. And so that's a growth mindset that we're still growing. So here I found another really great quote. Children have never been very good at listening to their parents, but they have never failed to imitate them, right? So really think about us, like teachers, parents, grandparents. We are their role models. And so we really have to be careful in terms of what we say to our child, because they are absorbing. And sometimes they have no idea if what we're doing is right or wrong, right? But they think, but they look up to us and they think that as long as we're doing it, it must be right. And so why not, right? So let's go to the next slide. This is based on educational psychology. It says that we have the tendency to think of this world two major ways. I mean, there are different ways, but two major ways. One is that, hey, I can learn to do anything I want. Or that, hey, my ability is limited. Okay. Or that failure is an opportunity for me to grow versus failure is the limit of my abilities. It's showing my weaknesses. Okay, so growth mindset is what we're trying to build in our student. If we want to cultivate a young and happy and competent or confident child, we want to encourage them to think or to grow with a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A lot of us are modeling fixed mindset with our child. So Miss Myers, anything you want to share about this slide here?
Definitely. Right. So like Dr. was said, growth mindset is really this idea that if you work hard and you persevere, you can do anything you set your mind to. It's important to remember that our children are sponges, right? They suck up everything that you say, whether you're paying attention to it or not. And so one of the big differences between growth mindset and a fixed mindset is, the idea of trying something versus not trying it. If you have a growth mindset, you're much more likely to try things. You're much more likely to be innovative rather than playing it safe. And you're more likely to learn from your failures rather than just not taking a risk in the first place. Right. So it's super, super important that we are focusing in on and honing this growth mindset. And the best way your child can learn is by watching you. And so if you look here, like there are very simple ways that you can shift your own language just so that it appears less kind of self-deprecating and a little more kind of positive, a little more focused on, I may not be able to do this now, but I might be able to do it later. Right. So you can try talking about your own mindset, your own struggles and your efforts that have led to your own personal success. And that can really help children. Right. So if you look even at the top one, if you say, oh, I'm not good at this, right? That's a fixed mindset. That's saying, I'm not good at this. I'm not going to be able to get better at this. But if you kind of dig a layer deeper, you can think, what am I missing? Right? I'm not good at this right now, or I'm not good at this yet. And it's probably because I'm missing a skill that I could learn that would improve what I'm doing. Right? Instead of saying, I give up. Say, "Oh, I'm going to try a different strategy. What I'm doing right now isn't working, but I could try something else and that might work." Right? So showing your child this whenever they're feeling really kind of bogged down or maybe unsure if they want to continue doing something. Um, as parents, as adults in their life, your words are so powerful, right? And I hope that's something that you always remember, right? The kind of love and respect they have for you makes everything you say that much more important. Um, right. And so, like I said, to try kind of just talking it out with them and remember the importance of your own words. Another thing is like you can reframe it, like looking at this question saying, I'm not good at PE, I'm not good at exercise or sports. I've actually personally felt that way my entire life or most of my life, right? I always felt like I was not athletic. And it wasn't until my 20s when I realized that athletic and strong meant something different. Um, and so you're able to kind of reframe something. So I was able to say, you know what, I don't feel super athletic. I haven't put a lot of time into that. Maybe I could get there if I kept working at it, but I can focus on exercise. I can lift weights. I can run. I can strengthen my body and demonstrate that to your child, make them a part of the process, bring them on a run with you. And, you know, even if it's hard at first, talk about it. Say, that that was hard. That was really hard. But tomorrow it's going to be a little easier.
So we talked about this earlier about extrinsic motivation. So the opposite of that is intrinsic motivation. So what we were saying was that a lot of parents tend to focus on extrinsic motivators, such as good grades, money, rewards. If you do this, I will give you that, right? So more tangible outcome. But actually, research says that when we focus on extrinsic motivators, it can actually decrease one's motivation, or it's harder for them to persist through difficult or challenging situations. Only when they have an intrinsic motivation, they will be able to, persist through difficult, tough situations, difficult projects, right? A really hard assignment or a subject that they are just maybe not as interested in studying. So, Mrs. Myers, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, definitely. Right. So when we think about intrinsic motivation, you can actually break it down into kind of three components, right? What leads to intrinsic motivation? And that's autonomy, growth mindset, and purpose, right? We just talked a bunch about growth mindset. But when we think about autonomy, it's, do our children have kind of choices over what type of tasks they're doing, when they do it, and how they do it? And that can really increase that intrinsic motivation. And like I said, the other piece is purpose. Why am I doing this? Why is this important? Um, and so intrinsic motivation is so important because it's going to increase that persistence, creativity, achievement in a way that extrinsic motivation is not. And, some solutions, some ways we can kind of foster this in our children is, one, to praise the process, right? Look at your child's effort rather than their intelligence. Um, Talk about kind of how much they learned and, maybe even like how much they overcame in that process. Students don't have to feel that they're already good at something in order to kind of hang in and keep trying. They just need to know that it's possible. And the goal with intrinsic motivation is to learn, not to prove that they are smart. Right? This can really foster a huge love of learning. Another piece, like I said, autonomy was a piece of intrinsic motivation. The more you give autonomy, the more intrinsically motivated a child is going to be. Same with purpose. Ask them big picture questions. Say, why are you learning this? How does this pertain to you? How does this pertain to the world you live in? And why is what you're learning, why is what you're doing important?
Intrinsic motivation and growth mindset, they are closely connected. Focus on what they have learned. We can ask them, hey, what was so interesting about this thing that you just learned? Again, focusing on knowledge versus anything that's external. Here is about deep thinking, something that our organization has been talking or focusing on quite a long time actually. And that's why we created a class called the deep thinking module. And so here I kind of, we drew this out for you, for the parents to understand, because we will hear parents say things like, oh, my child doesn't like to read. He is not a good reader, so we want him to read more. Okay, so I want you to focus on the three circles in the middle. Reading, okay? Reading is complicated. Reading involves decoding. You have to understand the words, okay? So I think for most parents, when they say reading, they're thinking about decoding, meaning, oh, I read these words, I get what they meant, okay? But actually, reading has another element or process, it's comprehension, right? So you have to know the words, and then you have to be able to know what these words together meant, okay? And then how does that happen? Well, through deep thinking. If you are able to think deeply about a concept, then you are able to connect these different ideas better. So again, a lot of parents will say, okay, my child doesn't like to read. My child needs more reading or enhance their reading capabilities. Great, but guess what? Reading and writing, they usually go together. Okay, why? So reading will be your input. You put things in your brain, right? So you can read, or you can do research online, or you can attend lectures, right? These are all input, things that go into your brain. Once they go into your brain, you have to have the capabilities of vocabulary, right? Grammar, to decode all these different messages. Then through deep thinking, you are able to comprehend and process and understand the information. So it's actually very complicated, okay? Then you have the output. How do you know? Like how do you even know if your child is understanding the materials? Well, if they can write it out, then you know, right? Or if they can present the information, summarize it, and even analyze it for you, then you know, right? If they can actually teach it, tutor their younger siblings, that's even better, right? And of course, communication, if they can tell someone else about it. So these are all the outputs that we need to have as a checkpoint to know if your child has actually comprehended the knowledge. And then of course, there's always a feedback loop, right? So our team created this model based on our understanding of the actual process and parents' confusion, because we want you to understand that, again, reading, it's not just reading. Reading will be much, much better if it's coupled with writing and presentation. And that's why we created a class, well, first deep thinking, and of course, we also have the reading, writing, and presentation class, right? Because we strongly believe that all these things need to go together in order for you to understand deeply about something. Here is Bloom's taxonomy. And if you look at this, right, this is an education, I guess, pyramid where it's telling you in terms of what is the end goal of knowledge, of education. It's not remembering, understanding, of course, right? But it would be even better if you can actually apply, like I said, tutoring, analyzing, right? If you can write a research paper, well, if you're 5, you can, right? But if you can actually write something about it, evaluating, but think about it, the goal of education is actually about creation. It's not about remembering. So again, think about all the top people in your field. Are they remembering or creating? Right? Again, think about it, right? So if you want your child to be doing well, then our goal should be educating them so that they are able to go through this pyramid to a point where they have this creativity, and then they're able to make new knowledge for themselves and for others.
So one thing I want to add is, here we see what we kind of consider lower level and higher level thinking, right? You can kind of break them up, almost kind of like 3 and 3. And At every age, children can access all of these, but it's going to look so different, if you're 7 versus if you're 12. And that's okay. For a 7-year-old, writing a paragraph and drawing a picture about something that they have learned, or kind of coming up with, a system or a few steps about a problem that they've discovered, that is creation, right? That is still accessing that higher level thinking. Um, but as you get older, that becomes, a full research project. That becomes perhaps a research proposal, even, right? So we want to acknowledge that at all of these stages, you can access this. Each child can. And it's really helpful in getting to those higher levels of thinking when you are able to think more deeply as a whole. And that's one of the things we were thinking about a lot when we created the deep thinking modules. What types of information do children need to develop? What skills do they need to develop to access those higher levels? Right. And so we started thinking about, okay, understanding success, knowing yourself better, understanding perspective taking, mindset, organization, setting appropriate goals for yourself, actively listening and reading, finding and using your inner voice, right? All of those things became kind of paramount when reaching these higher level thinking skills. And, in addition to being part of the team that helped to create the modules, I actually have the pleasure of teaching one of the classes, which has been wonderful. And I've been thinking recently about kind of one of my students who took the class. And, one of the big things we talked about was passion, right? When you're passionate about something, you can kind of grow that passion, right? Not just kind of thinking about it, but saying, okay, how can I use this to affect other people? How can I use it to advocate for others? And she was very passionate about reading, right? That's something that she loved to do. That was one of her hobbies. Um, anyway, fast forward a few weeks, and I was actually in another meeting with one of her other teachers, one of her advisors. And he said, I have to tell you the story. I was doing interview questions with this student that we share. And I asked her, if you won the lottery and you got a couple $1 million, what would you do with it? And he said he was expecting, a typical answer for someone her age group. And she's in about 7th grade. And she said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do with it. I learned recently that 14% of the world is illiterate, and that's a problem. And she said, so what I would do with that money is I would create a fund so that we could get education for women in rural villages who are being deprived of education. And then she went on to talk about why that was important, how it's going to increase the economic prosperity of the region and the country, and how it is going to increase these people's ability to be kind of productive members of society. And she also mentioned that it was going to decrease beliefs in kind of old superstitions. And he said he was floored. He said, I don't know where that came from. He said that was a college level answer. And I said it shows how much she's starting to internalize a lot of what we're talking about, taking something that you're passionate about and kind of digging into it deeper and saying, this is really interesting for me. How can I utilize this information? What could I create? How can I change the world using something I already love? Right. And that felt like such a huge moment of success for me as a teacher as well. I was thinking, oh my goodness, like I didn't tell her to do this. She figured it out on her own. The things that we taught her have kind of taken root, and she is now taking it a step further. Right. And so that's why all of those kind of smaller elements that we talk about end up being so important, because the children then can take them and build from there. It's about building that foundation.
Next topic we have, which is the final topic we have for the night, is learning styles and personalities, because we will get feedback from parents about how some of their sometimes their child can be too extroverted, right, too loud, or their child can be too quiet, right? So what do you do with that? So Mrs. Myers, any suggestions?
Yeah. Right. So every child is an individual, right? They're going to learn in their own unique way. They have their own personality that's affecting how they are learning and how they're approaching the information, and even how they're taking in that information, right? Like we know some people do best listening to content and absorbing it that way. Some people do best when there's a kinesthetic, a kind of a movement piece to it. So it's really important to kind of understand your child's learning style and their personality when we're thinking about kind of how they're going to be a learner overall. Right. And this is important because it gives additional opportunities for individualization, especially in goals, in learning, in growing their passions, increasing confidence, and developing leadership skills. Right. So, what are some kind of solutions or some things you can kind of do? One thing is learn more about your child's personality and their learning style, right? Especially for young children, you can also help them to start learning about themselves and gaining that greater sense of self by asking deeper questions, saying, what do you like? Why do you like that? Right? What do you not like? How would you describe yourself? Right? Why would you describe yourself in that way? Helping them just to kind of think about how they're learning or who they are in any certain situation. Um, Additionally, you can engage further with children's interests, hobbies, cultivate those passions. You can also have frequent kind of deep conversations, talk to them about, you know, openness, what it means to be kind of more closed off versus more open. You can talk to them about, you know, feeling more agreeable, or, you wouldn't use the word like neuroticism with, a 7-year-old, but you could talk to them about perfectionism, or, feeling that need to be good at everything, right? And you can engage them in those conversations. This is another place where modeling actually can be really helpful. If you see something in your child and saying, oh, I see that, they are sometimes feeling like a perfectionist. They're not willing to make that mistake. I'm going to model making mistakes and being okay with it, in hopes that some of that kind of piece of that personality, that neuroticism, is then kind of undermined or pushed down, and they see, okay, I can make that mistake. I can be okay. Right. And then the final thing is kind of build confidence in your child. Be aware that, children want to be accepted. They want to feel confident. They want to feel proud of what they do. Building things like a growth mindset builds confidence at the same time. Right. And also know that, your child is going to have different fears and different skills that they are working with. Right. When we talk about a child who is shy, typically you're talking about a child that is afraid to do something. So you can dig deeper into that. Why are you afraid? Right, what is causing that? Where did that come from? Um, and what you might learn is your child might not necessarily be shy, but rather be pensive, right? They might be listening and taking things in. And when you understand that more, you can then come out and say, okay, I understand you're taking things in, you're learning all the information. Conversation is a two-way street. Let's work on responding as well, right? And you can build on that skill instead.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good suggestion for parents, right? Because like I am actually a big introvert. I don't know, Linda, if you can tell, but like I'm a really big introvert, right? And so I actually prefer not to talk to people if possible. Like I would love to live in a secluded place, but of course I still have to do presentations, right? I have to talk, I have to teach, I have to interact. And so being an introvert doesn't mean that you are unable to communicate. Like Ms. Myers said, that it's a skill that you can learn and you can overcome. It might not be the most, I guess, desirable thing for you, but if they know what they do, like by talking to others, can actually be helpful, and by being helpful can actually make them feel valuable, then hey, they should know that, right? So like tutoring, teaching, coaching, these are all good ways to bring a shy child out of their bubble. And of course, slowly, right? We don't want to just force them. We have to first talk to them about intrinsic motivators, not extrinsic, but intrinsic motivators, things that they care about, things that will bring joy to them. And then we slowly guide them through that process.
I saw one parent asked if you should be helping your children with homework. And so, what I would say to this is absolutely help them with homework, scaffold the process, but don't do it for them, right? So, what you want to be doing is kind of looking at what it is. Again, you can ask further questions. Say, what are you having trouble with? How do you do this in class? What's the process? You can even show them tips and tricks that you would use to do it, but don't give them the answer. Just kind of sit with them. And sometimes you can even just kind of sit with them in frustration, be like, yeah, this is really hard. That's a good point. Let's see what we can do next.
Like, should we interfere how our child chooses their friends?
Yeah, right. That is a really interesting question. And so I think, like a lot of things, that depends, right, on what kind of going on what kind of behaviors you might be seeing. For the most part, children are going to be okay kind of picking their own friends. Right, you're going to be able to kind of at home talk about kind of the qualities and the behaviors that they can look for in friends. And the biggest thing is going to be about how the friend is going to treat them and how the friend is going to treat others. And that you start kind of getting into that self-advocacy piece as well, right? Making sure that whoever your child is friends with is going to be constantly treating them in a positive manner. And if they're not, saying, this doesn't sound like a real friendship to me, right? So almost teaching them what it is to be a good friend. And then they're going to begin choosing friends who kind of meet that definition, and saying that someone who isn't a friend or someone who's acting like a tricky person is someone who's going against that definition, who is not behaving in that capacity, who is maybe bringing them down in some way.
And I think research shows that students start to feel peer pressure as young as third grade, right? Third or fourth grade. So, so some students will do not so great things just because they want to please their friends. So we do have to teach them about self-confidence, because slowly they will exhibit more independence from the parents, right? They want to be independent from their parents, but the opposite of that is that they will lean towards their friends more. And so that's why it's important to model good friend behavior, but at the same time, teach them about self-confidence, that there are things that they should be doing, there are things that they shouldn't be doing. Like there are some important topics like sex, drugs, right? These are things that you should be able to talk to your child in a straightforward manner. I think as young as maybe, I think the age group is like around 11 or 12. I think they will be able to understand, but parents, don't be afraid, okay? We need to have that conversation with our child, and they will be able, I think they will respect you, and they will be able to get it. They might say no, like they might say things like, oh, you're just joking, like I'm not doing this or that, but just, you have to tell them, hey, this is serious, and we need to listen. So vocabulary, right? So in a creative writing class, do you need lots of vocabulary? Like, yeah, Mrs. Myers, you teach writing. What do you think?
So I think that, with vocabulary, the best way to learn it is through reading, right? So that's what you want to promote with your children. There have been a lot of studies that have actually showed that young children up through, middle and high school even, actually write in the same way of the stories that they've read, right? So the more you read, kind of the more stylistic choices you're going to learn, but also more vocabulary. And so what I always recommend to all of my students is, when you're reading, if you come across a word that you don't know, that's fantastic, right? I'm so happy you have that opportunity, because now you can go look it up and you're going to learn a new word because you're learning it in context. It's not just this random vocabulary word. It's, I saw this sentence in a book I'm enjoying reading and I don't understand the sentence, and I'm going to go learn the definition, and now I have a new word, right? So, we are constantly, all of us, learning new vocabulary words, and I do the exact same thing. And I tell it to my students. I learn probably a new word or two every day, every time I read, right? So even if you feel like you're worried about how you're going to help them, the way you help them is just promoting that curiosity, that desire to learn new vocabulary words, and they're just going to keep growing.
Okay, now there's another question about how do parents of, I guess, first generation parents help their child with English vocabulary? Any suggestions, Mrs. Myers?
So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just saying as well. Cultivating that curiosity for learning new words, making sure that they have access to a lot of words, whether it's in text or, listening to something. You could listen to a book on tape or music. Really just giving them as much language as possible and reminding them that even if you don't know the word yourself, you can learn it too, right? So if they come to you and say, "What's this word?" It's okay to say, "I have no idea. Let's go learn. Let's go look it up together. I have a dictionary in the other room. Let's go."